Hey everybody, I was just popping on here to do a short quasi lecture about the themes for this week and things I want y'all to be thinking about. Also to remind you that tomorrow will be our weekly meeting. If you're not able to make it, it's always recorded, and the link to the recording will be put up as soon as it's rendered. Okay, so what I wanted to do today is I wanted to kind of like touch base now that we've had a week. I realize of very fast-paced learning, but we've had a week of getting more into the idea of what we're really trying to do in this course, which is to rethink how we understand science, rethink how we're related to and make use of technology, and then sort of situate ways forward for ourselves and for people we know and for our society as a whole to not merely become the tools of our tools. I guess might be a way to put it. That's always a problem, right? So your philosophical reflection this last week I'd had you do, that was due last night on Monday, June 8th, actually had to do with you asking questions about simple things that you take for granted. Some of you chose a cup, some of you chose a bed, some of you chose a door. I've read through everything. I haven't had a chance to make comments, nor has my grader yet, but you're doing a good job on the whole. I thought y'all did a really good job. I liked your guiding quotes and the things that you picked, but that exercise was actually to get you used to the notion of qualification, what that is, of the ways that we reduce things down either to a thing that's unnecessary to us and therefore we don't need to think about it at all, to a thing that we use all the time to the point that we begin to forget that we've even learned how to use it or that we're even using it, till it breaks. Usually that's always a good tell of when you know, like if your glasses get to a point where you just don't even think about wearing them that much, and you sooner or later you do, it's when the glasses break or when the glasses fall off or something like that that you kind of get back into this thing you take for granted is right there is something that you maybe should think about more and pay attention to, because the thing is that once like just taking for example the glasses as a modification example, if I get used to the wearing of the glasses to such a degree that they become forgotten, they can be taken for granted. It's only when I realize I need the glasses, if I have them off, if they've fallen off or they've broken, that I realize that I, in one sense, by making the glasses a part of me, I've also made myself a part of the glasses. Right? They are the extension and or correction of my vision. Right? To be someone who wears glasses is to be someone who is in the process of needing clarification of vision, of needing this tool, right? And you can get to a point where you forget about it being there, so you forget that it has constituted you, it has changed how you are, right? So that's just with something kind of, it's more complicated than a cup in one sense, but definitely it's a sort of one of the early inventions of modernity were these prescription glasses. Okay, now that brings up the question of modernity. You're reading a book by Bruno Latour called We Have Never Been Modern. His basic thesis is that modernity or the modern is actually an ideological way of looking at the world. It's a viewpoint of seeing the world, right? And it tries to always compare itself to the old way of seeing the world. So you've got this kind of, as you always do with words that are, adjectives that can describe more, can can be descriptive or change the description of something. Modern changes its meaning depending on whether you're talking about an epoch in history, that the modern period begins around 1600, 1550, somewhere towards the end of the Protestant Reformation and just before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You have this birth of the modern. It's called the modern. And Latour's position basically is that, well, that's an interesting worldview, but has anybody really ever been modern? Has anybody ever really been in the new fashion? So we look at that word, modern. It's a word that originally develops into our language from Italian during the Renaissance, and it actually was a way of describing the new kind of architecture that they had begun to do with churches and buildings in the early Renaissance period around the late 1300s in Italy. The word makes its way around. You should know, if you speak Spanish or Italian, you know that the word for fashion is modo. And we often talk about the current mode, or it's the newest mode, or it's in mode, right? Or a la mode. Well, that's the word modern, right? So modern actually, in this sense, means the new fashion. And moderno was the new fashion of building, right? And we should really kind of take that into consideration. You know, the fact that it was originally utilized to describe architecture doesn't mean that forever and always it must only describe architecture, but it does mean that if we can trace back to that point, we see how this old word that derives from Latin and meant to fashion or refashion, it now becomes this qualifier of novelty, right? And in one sense, what that tells us is the new, the novel, will always be preferable in modernity to the old. So as a historical epoch, the modern is typified by constantly challenging the old ways, right? That actually probably, to vary a couple of y'all's questions from our first interrogative exercise, that probably brings up to the fore, you know, the question is getting into the habit of preferring the novel, which is what we would say that the modernity is the preference of the new, the novel or the new over the old, is getting into that as an old habit itself. How do you get out of it, right? So in other words, if the modern is always preference of the new, but then the modern becomes the viewpoint in the way of you always traditionally for a couple of hundred years have preferred the new over the old, that itself becomes tradition. So there's a conceit built into modernity, or to the modern, or the idea that we are modern, that we don't allow ourselves to become slaves to tradition. But we actually see in our society on a regular basis that the old is reverenced and the new is suspected. So society itself is in a state of schizophrenia in a sense, right? You want the well-established brand, you want the well-established technique, you want the well-established way of doing things, and you're maybe open to changing stuff a little bit, but the changes don't need to be disruptive or challenging. So this is actually the reason why the contemporary period, and now at this point I want to draw a distinction between modernity and the contemporary. In the contemporary period, technology is basically being driven right now by inventors and CEOs and investors who want to disrupt how things have been. But the question again becomes, what do they want to disrupt, right? As we go along in the semester, we'll see that some of the people who are leaders in the tech industry don't only want to disrupt the way that we do our day-to-day chores. They want to disrupt the way that we live, literally, that we would be able to live forever, or that we would be able to live to be 200 years old or 300 years old. And some of them actually want to disrupt the system so that everybody benefits and has a better, around the world, has a better kind of life because technology does all the work. And you know, as you can imagine, there are all kinds of issues that come to the fore when you get to the place where you're saying, you know, let technology do all the work and humans can be free to do other things. I mean, you still got, in 50 years, we're going to have maybe 9 billion people living in the world. Maybe not even 50 years, 25 years, we'll have about 9 billion people in the world. And we've convinced ourselves that the only way to have a good life is to be someone who produces, someone who works. But we primarily have reduced work down to what earns you money. I'll agree that to be a human being actually is to be someone who works, someone who has an active life. But me writing my poetry and me doing my art and me even doing my philosophizing outside of when I get paid to teach people like y'all, you know, none of that stuff is valuable in the sense of people want to buy it. Everybody wants to buy it. So your work has to be something that other people want to buy because that's the kind of society or culture that we've developed. Some of these people who are at the forefront of disruptive technology literally want to disrupt everything to where people don't have to work anymore to earn a living. But they're not saying that people stop working. So the real issue becomes, again, you know, in our contemporary time, we have these technologists, you might say technoscientists, technologists who want to disrupt everything about the way we live so that it will be done better and will be done with, you know, more openness and people can be flourish better and all the rest of this. But at the same time, contemporaneously, we're still holding to this idea, right? So here you got disruption on this side, and then here this very simple idea. The steady way is to earn money, to have a job, you know, to reduce everything you do to work in the sense of employment, right? Whereas on this side, the most radical elements are, no. Work should be an expression of your being. So we want to get rid of you having to worry about being in a job in order to get by, so that you can actually utilize your creativity to do the things that you want to do. Use your energy to do the creative things that you want to do, right? So that's the disruptive versus the stable. So the contemporary then is, to, in one sense, is going to be the time you live in plus about 150 years. So you can more specifically talk about yourself and your contemporaries, the people who are alive right now. And that would be like 3 or 4 generations of people. But you also, historically, in history, contemporary means what's happened basically in the last 150 years. Because it takes 2 or 3 centuries to really rethink what the hell a goings-on meant if you're really doing rigorous history, right? So we're still just now getting a good idea of what the hell the French Revolution, the American Revolution, Napoleon was all about, because that's over 150, 170 years ago. But we're still trying to figure out the full consequences of the Civil War, the World War II, Korean War, any of those kinds of things, right? So when you talk about modern life, you're just talking about life that has a tendency to prefer the new over the old. When you're talking about contemporary life, you're actually talking about the stuff that's going on pretty close to you right now, right? And when you talk about the modern period, you're actually talking about a period of time that lasts in history beginning about 1600 going forward, right? So it distinguishes especially Western Euro-American history from medieval and ancient European history. Okay, but you do need to be able to kind of move back and forth on those things, right? Now, one of the other things that I think is really important that we got from last week in the reading of the Borgman was the fact that we can talk about technology according to those three theories that I touched on last Wednesday. That's a theory of them being substantive. The theory of technology is substantive, a theory that technology is instrumental, and the theory of technology is a pluralistic view. The pluralistic view is the one that says, well, here's a thing, and that thing has to be the thing it is. That's the substantive. It has a kind of substance to it, right? A cup won't suddenly become a bicycle, and a door won't suddenly become a goat or something like that. And then there's the instrumentalist view that technology is simply a tool. It's value neutral in the sense that, it's only how the tool's used that makes any difference. Notice in the previous view, the substantive view, you can talk about good and bad in that kind of way of it's a good door, it's a bad door, mostly in the sense of how the thing is supposed to be, versus instrumentalist. All those things kind of become value neutral. If you use a door, if you're big and strong and you can use a door to beat somebody up with, the door suddenly right? You can just slam it in someone's face to the degree that you break their nose. It has an instrumental value, but that instrumental value for the person is to protect themselves or to do some harm to another person. It's not the tool, it's the intent of the person that matters. So what Borgman wants is to get us to kind of, what he's going to really work with is getting us to move in the direction of the pluralistic, or the pluralism of views, which is that everything is itself, that's substantive, and has the thing that gives it power, that makes it do what it does, and then everything also has a use, especially if it's made by human beings. But then, especially when you start getting into this different way of looking at stuff like that, and you have to kind of bring them closer together, right? You're also going to be looking at how, in the pluralism of views, how all the different ways that something appears in a society, appears in a culture, also play into how it is and what it is and the way that it's perceived. Now, a nice thing to a place where Borgman and Latour, I think, kind of come together is in this notion then. So Borgman's plurality of views is not unlike Latour's hybridity, or the hybrid nature of events or things, right? That when we look right now, as an example, at COVID-19, it's seen from a lot of different perspectives. Sometimes it's seen from a lot of times it's talked about from the perspective of the patient, the person who might get sick. But a lot of other times, we have to talk about it from the point of view of the medical researcher who sees something different, and the medical doctor who sees something different, and the policymaker who sees something different, right? So this is a really nice example when you look at any event that contains a thing that seems to be driving the event, right? Then that event is going to be understood not in one particular way, like the scientist is the one who knows what this is, but it's going to have to come about through a communal exchange, hopefully a loving struggle, to try to redefine what we're looking at and how we're going to deal with it. So the same thing that you can say about a disease like COVID-19, you can say about any kind of new technology or about any kind of social event, right? That they're all to be approached from a plurality of views to try to see, really in a sense, what's shared in common across the views. That kind of moves you in the direction of the substantive. And then all the creative ways that something can be understood or something can be used, which begins to move you more in the modality of function or instrumentality. So, in a sense, everything that's presented to us in society is a hybrid. And we can treat it like it's a substance that doesn't change. We can treat it like it's only this function, and we only care about its function. But in all reality, it's coming to us from diverse perspectives that may be reducing the thing down to a substance as physicists understand it, or a substance as biologists understand it. Or it may be reducing the thing down to a tool as carpenters understand it, or a tool as engineers understand it, or a tool as an artist understands it, right? And everything is looked at then that appears to us in society comes with all of these different interpretations, all of these different possibilities in it. And that's the reason that, especially in a democratic representative republic like the United States, it's sometimes very difficult to get a handle on an issue. You know, we could talk about all kinds of issues that are promoted, about science, technology, and society that you might not think at first has much to do with science, technology, and society, but it does. Because science and technology are utilized often in the hybridity and the pluralistic use of them to take them, right, and see a new scientific tool from the perspective of the military automatically changes that new technological tool or that new technological discovery seen from the point of view of medical science. Seen from the point of view of psychology, right? That thing that we're interacting with, that new piece of technology, comes to us from all these different perspectives. And that's how it shows up. So on the one hand, this instrument that I'm using right now, my iPhone, that I've put an extended microphone on to give it a little bit better sound, my iPhone is a tool for communicating. As a philosopher, I use it this way to teach lessons. As a progressive, I might use it other ways. As somebody who just likes to stay in touch with old friends, I use it another way. So even that, the thing comes in with all of these possible ways of making use of it, right? Because it is a hybrid thing, and sometimes it's just up for us to see how could this be used differently. But we're not the only ones doing that. There are people with power that gain more power by the manipulation of people who have realized that they can utilize this technology not only to sway you through the spread of misinformation, but to monitor you, right? Everybody who carries a smartphone and doesn't do there's 20 or 30 things that you need to do to try to help yourself be less, to help your privacy be less invaded. Everybody who doesn't do any of that stuff, you leave yourself wide open to constant invasion, because the government sees you as a suspect or somehow the police see you as a suspect or something. There are groups out there who want to cheat you out of your money, that see you in another kind of way, and all of these people can get access to you through the cell phone if you don't take care with it. So in one sense, you have to see the cell phone the way you see the cell phone, but you also have to see the cell phone in this more broad sense if you're going to actually respond in a way where where you maximize your privacy while still keeping all of this convenience. So I've mentioned, I think, a couple of times the idea of scientism. Scientism is when people say that the only way to solve any problem, the only way to know reality itself is through science. And science can explain everything and solve every problem. And the issue you get with that is, I'm not saying that a rigorous way of thinking about the world, which would be scientific in the broad sense, can help you do those things. And maybe the only way to go forward is to take care with how strictly and how profoundly you really consider, critique, and attempt to understand how the world is. That's science in the broad sense. Scientism, though, is when we say, okay, usually it's technology. Some aspects of technology and engineering, but definitely science, and as you know, in its different disciplines, are the only way that you can truly explain things. And someday we'll explain everything, and once everything is explained, we'll have, complete control of the world or something like that. This is not necessarily something most scientists think, right? So scientism is not necessarily the base notion of scientists. It's the base notion. It's kind of an ideology that allows a lot of people to say, well, I'm not a scientist, so I'll just leave it up to them to solve the problem, or then it begins to kind of move in another direction of which scientist should I trust. And you begin to see that it doesn't actually work like science as a rigorous empirical methodology should work. It actually, scientism is an ideology that sort of paints a view, right? In one way, this word technoscience is going to be thrown around a lot over the next few weeks, is sort of the popular expression of that scientism. So that idea that Borgman had, that that the majority of people believe that science and technology are the same thing. They don't see what the distinction is between doing science and making technology and using technology. So technoscience becomes this sort of way of saying only through the advancement and progress of the sciences, through ever new technology, can we actually discover how things work and therefore control reality. Okay? So technoscience is that is that expression of scientism that says science can solve any problem given time. It will invent technologies that allow anyone to confront those problems. And then once we have the right technologies from science, we can control the world to our benefit. That's technoscience, right? Now, I think that I'm going to stop now and leave for Thursday a little more talk about techno-society networking, the idea of enframing from Heidegger. I'm going to leave that till Thursday. What I want y'all to do is be sure you tune in tomorrow for the conversation on Zoom, and if you can't make it, it's recorded. Be sure you watch the recording. Again, if you have any kinds of questions that you want to ask me and everybody else, there's the general ask your questions, post your findings. There's a general discussion, right, that's there in Module 2 that I'll move from module to module so that it always stays there. And that's a general discussion where you can ask any question you want to ask, or you can post anything you've found that you think is interesting and pertinent to the course. I've already posted 2 things from the New York Times Tech newsletter that I think y'all would enjoy. Okay, so I'll see y'all tomorrow, Wednesday the 10th at 11 a.m. on Zoom, and that will be recorded. And then I'll put out another little video on Thursday that kind of goes forward from Techno Science into Techno Society and networking, and Heidegger's ideas of framing, or ordering the world in a techno-scientific way. Bye.